they're actually doing it. So I'm guessing this is going on the experimental card. Okay, interruption real quick. Word is Jeff Kaplan wants to speak to us.
What's up, everyone? This is Jeff with the Overwatch team. Very exciting developer update today, because in the last developer update, I mentioned that we would be bringing you something very special, which we call the experimental card.
Volume up. Yep, sorry. What?
Well, we are now on the eve of the experimental card going live. And that's to say that if everything goes correctly, tomorrow we'll have the first version of the experimental card up, and all of you, including everybody on console, will get to play our first experimental modes and test things that we're really unsure about, and that's why they're going to you. I want to remind everybody that the experimental card is not targeted at bug fixing or stability or anything like that. The experimental card is really focused on radical gameplay changes or things that we want to try out and get your direct player feedback on. So, the first version of the experimental card that goes live hopefully tomorrow. Now, as I said, stuff could go wrong, so maybe it gets delayed a little bit, but hopefully tomorrow this card will go up, and we are going to be testing something that I actually mentioned in a forum post for those of you who are paying attention back in January. That was a change to the role queue system. Now, I don't want to panic everybody, and I want to remind you that these are really experimental changes. We are unsure of these. That's why we're not patching them live. That's why they're not on the PTR. This is just an experiment that we're trying. So the change to role queue that we're going to be trying on the experimental card tomorrow is one in which it changes the number of roles and restrictions to those roles such that we will have 1 tank, 3 damage, and 2 support players. So obviously this shifts off of the current role queue, which is 2-2-2. Now, you might be wondering, why are you trying this change? And I think the why is the most important thing behind any design decision. So the impetus for this was a discussion we were having months ago. In fact, we were having this in, I think it was November or December of last year, where we were talking about how do we make damage queue times faster. As many of you know, when we introduced role queue, which is a system we think is very successful and has overall been a positive change to the game, it added some extra queue time for those players who were playing damage. And one of the ideas that we started to experiment with internally was 3 damage players being available to each match instead of 2.
Let's pause it there. Okay. I like how I've paused it on a frame where Jeff looks like he is crying for help. He's just, please help me. No, actually, I'm fine with this. This is what the experimental card is for, right? It's interesting to me where he's kind of highlighted, it's not going, this is why it's not going on the PTR. That's the language that I'm sort of really reading into, is that he's just it's not going on the PTR because he's just hey, if it goes on the PTR, it's probably going on to live. We definitely made the decision that, we want it on live. So that's interesting language choice. It's not on PTR, it's on the experimental card, we just want to try it out. I'm fine with that. I was just kind of curious to see if they would use the experimental card for just radical balance changes as well, and just see kind of how it plays, and then get more data on it, and then maybe push something live. But
this
works too.
A lot of fun. It was very controversial on the development team. We had very strong reactions for and against the system. And ultimately, at around the same time, we had also mentioned to you that we were going to do this experimental card. I made that post on the forums, and so many players said, well, why don't you let us try it? So this is your chance. You can test out one of the wacky things that we've tried. What we are going to be looking for as the experimental card is up is we are going to be looking for the effects to the queue times to see if it actually makes a difference to damage queue times, and we'll be tracking statistics very closely.
That's interesting. Now, they're not idiots. The instant thought that occurs to me with this experiment is like, well, the player pool on the experimental card is going to be very different, and the thing you're going to get is like it's so difficult to make use of this data accurately, and because surely fewer tanks are going to queue into this. Like, there's a couple of people saying, like, yeah, I play tank, and I'm just not going to queue if there's only one tank. So you've already, like, cut down the pool of people who want to queue into the game. Where the waiting for, like, when I say waiting, I mean, like, wait as in the weight of something. The waiting will be different in terms of the pools that they're drawing from. So with the 2-2-2 system, you've got, like, a pool of tanks, you've got a big pool of DPS, and they've got a pool of support players. And the issue is, like, the bottleneck for all of them, I kind of drawn a womb. The bottleneck for all of them is the same, right? If you think about it like this, right? Like, you got a big pool of tank players, you got a big pool of DPS players, you got a big pool of support players. The DPS pool is like 5 times the size of every other one, and so naturally the DPS players have to wait longer. The issue with this is chances are you're going to have a smaller pool of tank players through an even smaller nozzle, and then you're going to have like a huge pool of DPS players because they all want to try it, and then the support players will probably just be about the same and not really giving a shit because nothing changes for a support player, right? And so it's sort of like you're going to get very skewed results as a result of that. Now, they're not idiots, they know this, and I'm sure they'll try and normalize the stats as best as possible. It's just, it makes me instantly kind of circumspect of like, Are you really going to get good data on the queue times?
And seeing how it affects not only the queue times within the experimental card, but how that fans out to the rest of the service, including quick play, competitive, and the different modes in the arcade, in particular quick play classic. So we want to see what queue times are like, and that's what the development team is looking for. We're also looking for your feedback because this is a radical change. There's a lot different.
Like, that to me is way more useful. Like, does the game feel more fun? Does the game feel more exciting? Like, is it satisfying to play? Is it more interesting? Like, that to me is way more useful than any of the data stuff.
As I had mentioned in that forum post a few, I guess it was like a month ago at this point, the biggest concern we have with this change and why we were reluctant to make this one is we're very concerned about what this does to what players have come to call off tanks.
Yes.
Specifically Roadhog, Zarya, and Diva. What you are also going to see on the experimental card, in addition to the change to the queuing ratio, you're going to see big balance changes to these heroes. Now, don't freak out. These balance changes are not intended to make it to the live game unless we were to put the 3-2-1 system out there. Under our normal 2-2-2 roll queue, we would never make balance changes like this. But this is a look into what happens if we decide to make Roadhog the only tank in the match, or if we decide to make Diva the only tank in the match. You are going to have some
interesting choice of words again. That they're going to make Roadhog like, if I were them, I would definitely like push Roadhog into a DPS. You just make Roadhog into a big tanky DPS sort of thing, similar to the vein of Mei. And then you like make Diva more of a full tank, right? And you push Diva towards like the tanky side of things, maybe. You push Sigma towards the tanky side, Zarya towards the tanky side. Like, Roadhog just does not work as a tank.
That most players have more fun not playing the game and instead buying loot boxes, so we will be focusing on that instead.
Inside.
The sad part. This is a sad truth that myself and Sty and probably like every other Overwatch creator has noticed is there is a big culture in Overwatch of not playing the game but talking about the game, or playing the game for a week, or like even that small, like a couple of days a month, and then talking about the game. And like I'm guilty of this at times. I take breaks from Overwatch because I just cannot bear to play it for long periods of time. It just drives me insane. There is definitely some truth to that joke.
Into the type of balance changes that we would need to make. So we really want to hear from you. We want to hear from tank players. We want to hear from non-tank players. We're going to be looking at the damage queue times and seeing if the experiment's actually fixing the problem that it's trying to solve. One thing that's really cool about the experimental card, and I want to remind you all of, is that when you queue up for matches in the experimental card, you'll still be leveling your account. So that means if you get another level, you'll still get your loot box reward.
Loot boxes.
And if there is an event going on simultaneous to the...
Suddenly it all makes sense. Suddenly it all clicks together. They're releasing the experimental card and the Mardi Gras update at the same time to incentivize a huge influx of players and giving them a new toy to play with. Oh my god, they're a fucking genius. They're a genius. Because, okay, these like events that they're doing, these like mini events that they're doing, I'm not a fan, but I've never been like a big fan of like, of these kind of events where it's just like skin rewards, cosmetic rewards, because I don't care that much. Where it's like, I don't actually, I have enough currency in Overwatch to buy everything I could ever want. So I don't need to really like jump in and go, oh, I gotta get this skin for Ashe because I have a bunch of Ashe skins. So if I want to put Ashe in a cool skin, I have a few options available to me, and missing out on a skin or two, I don't give a shit. I've got enough cool things for Ashe where I don't need more. I don't have that like bug that some people have in the back of their heads going, you've got to get everything, you've got to get everything, get all the things. That's your favorite character, you've got to have everything for them. Like I have some stuff missing on my Widowmaker, I have some stuff missing on Ana, I have some stuff missing for Zen. It doesn't bother me. It really doesn't bother me. And I'm eternally thankful for that fact, because the amount of exploitation for those sorts of people is horrendous, and like it's something they actively need to train to get rid of, and I recommend you do train to get rid of it. Try and like suppress that urge and push yourself out of it, because my god, companies will bend you over for it, and it's just not nice. But this is actually really clever, because now you've got a new toy, so there's like double incentives. Because the issue with those events is like, come back and play Overwatch and get a skin and a spray and an icon. Woo! And that's kind of it. And a counter fills up as you do it. And that's kind of the excitement of that event. And that's really boring. If you sort of pull it apart like that, it's just really dull. It's really dull. But now there's an experimental card, and you get completion for the event while doing the experimental card. Suddenly, you're hitting the people who want something new in Overwatch. You want to try something new. Like, I want to try this. I think this is going to be fun to play around with. And you get the people who want the new skins. Suddenly, it's a twofold attack. Suddenly, it's like, okay, now we're getting something. And with the constant rumors, and this is the thing that gets me, really gets me, is there a constant, like, this constant thing of circulating that March 2nd, Project A is going to have some kind of announcement. Something is happening on March 2nd where Project A is getting some info out there. And I guarantee you everyone at Blizzard is crapping their pants about that, because the moment that comes out, anything that Blizzard announced for the next 2 weeks is going to just be run over. We are due for a new hero in Overwatch. We're absolutely 100% due for a new hero in Overwatch. The last one to release was Sigma, and that was like mid to late last year, I think. It's been a while now since Sigma came out. So it's like, they're scared. I think they are genuinely scared, and I think that this is a good way to inject some life into the game, because it's like, yeah, you get everyone's attention again. And it's something new in Overwatch, which we don't get enough.
The experimental card being up, the example I'll use is like Summer Games or our Halloween event. You will still be getting credit towards those epic skin unlocks like you normally do. So I think that will be very cool, and there might be some event surprises coming your way while this experimental card is up. So just remember, you're getting rewarded for testing out new and cool things. And I can't say this last thing enough. Don't panic when you see this card go up. These are changes we are unsure of, and that's why we're getting your feedback on them. It doesn't mean that they're imminently coming to Overwatch anytime soon. It just helps you get some insight into what we're focused on and some of our design process. So We hope you enjoy the experimental card when it goes live. We're looking forward to hearing all of your feedback. And as always, thanks for playing Overwatch, and thanks for being such a great part of our community.
Why have a picture of my most hated foe? Let's get a frame with Jeff back. There we go. There he is. I'm kind of, yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. I want to see more stuff like this happen with the experimental card. Like, this is kind of what I was hoping they'd use it for. Do some really sweeping balance changes, change some system mechanics, see how it works. Get data on it, and then you don't even have to use that complete data. I don't really want new heroes. I feel like it doesn't really add much to the game itself. It just panders to ooh shiny. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. I'm kind of on the fence. I think more heroes, it's just kind of, it's interesting. It adds more ways to play Overwatch. What I'm hoping and what I suspect is going to happen is this, right? They do the 132 experiment, and you get data. You get information. And this is the thing that people struggle with where it comes to like data and information, which is the way that data gets used by a scientist or by something is you make an observation. The way it works is this: you observe, and you come up with a hypothesis or just like a theory. Well, just a hypothesis at the time. And the hypothesis is generally quite weak, right? It's generally a weak hypothesis. The example I always go to when I'm trying to explain the scientific method to people is, you take a rubber ball and you drop it and it bounces and it comes back up at a certain height. And you go, oh, there's something at play here. If I drop something, and then you can make a hypothesis of, no matter what I drop, it will always bounce to a certain height of 1 meter, right? It'll bounce up 1 meter. No matter where I drop it from or how I drop it or what the object is, it will always bounce to 1 meter because that's how the universe works. That's what I've seen, so that's how the universe works. And then you form an experiment, right? And the experiment is the important part. Because then what you do is you get a bunch of rubber balls and you try bouncing them from different heights. And you get data out of the experiment. And what you do is you go, well, the data says this. And if you're really, really into your hypothesis, what you might do is the thing where you take the data and you try and support your hypothesis with your data, and it's like, well, these balls were clearly misshapen, and the something was wrong with the floor, and so it all didn't work out. But this data set here shows that it always bounces to 1 meter. Data is something that you use to shore up a hypothesis, to shore up a theory. It's absolute, but it's like data can be used in a variety of different ways. It gets plugged into different ways, and it's the interpretation and the use of that data. It's not even like manipulation. People tend to go to manipulation for this. It's just how you use the data to support various different outcomes, and then some of them are more credible than others. Some of them are more, make more sense than others. Some of them are more logical than others. Some of them reference to other data sets or other experiments that people have done, and eventually you build up more and more and more data, and you narrow in and you narrow in, and you get something that is rigorously supported by the data and seems to encapsulate all of it. But very often in modern science, what you'll end up with is the data is very complete for a theory, and then there's usually just this one weird anomaly that people just don't quite understand. Weird edge case, and it doesn't quite work, but the hypothesis and the theory explains everything else, so it just kind of works. And if it kind of works, then you're probably near the truth. You just need to tweak one or two things. Bringing it back to Overwatch, the thing with 132 is I don't think the game will ever transition fully to 132, at least not in name, right? Because if people really like this, if the people come out and oh my god, this is so much better, yes, instantly do it, and everyone says that, they'll do it. There's no reason not to. But what's probably going to come out is, you know what, I kind of liked how fast the game was, or I kind of like how this game felt, or I kind of liked, just how more freedom there was, and I liked the faster queue times and all this kind of stuff. And what you'll start seeing is tank balance be pushed towards DPS balance, right? You'll see, and this is already kind of happening with supports, where Moira plays a little bit more DPS-y than a pure, there's not been a new Mercy You know, there's not been a new support that is just pure support. We've had like Brig, who's like a hybrid melee sort of tanky DPS-y healy sort of character. You know, she brawls in and heals while she brawls. We've had like even all the new supports added. Ana is just like a sniper. She shoots people. That's very like DPS-y kind of gameplay. It's not pure supportive gameplay. It can be very aggressive. Moira wants to deal damage and wants to play aggressively, wants to be attacking people. So it's Baptiste has this fucking machine gun that does similar damage to Soldier 76, right? It's like this push towards more DPS style gameplay that hasn't kind of happened in tanks yet, I would say. Like Sigma does more damage than most tanks, but he's still like putting barriers up and he's still like very defensive in his playstyle. It wouldn't surprise me to see tank balance actually be pushed more towards DPS, because what they could center on is, well, people want this DPS gameplay. They want this faster gameplay. And this ties back to something that Jeff said a while ago as well in one of his statements, which is like, oh, we feel like, I feel like, I think this is just a Jeff thing, but he said, like, I feel that we might have overbalanced in terms of going too hard on the team play aspect. Like, this is a drum that I've been beating for absolutely ages, right? Which is that he feels that it's like, oh, it's too much towards you're dependent entirely on your team, and therefore you've got to, you know, you're just so reliant on your team that there's no individual playmaking and stuff like that. So it all kind of ties back into that as well. Where I think more DPS-y playstyle is less linked to that, and that's more, yeah, that's more, thinking of the words, trying not to lose my train of thought. That's more of an end goal. Like, the long-term goal is to try and liberate Overwatch a little bit more to individual playmaking, especially as like Project A seems to be leaning more on Counter-Strike and leaning more on that individual skill aspect. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Overwatch kind of follow suit slightly, just to kind of keep up with the trend overall in gaming and try and keep pace. But again, these are long-term objectives, and I think this is the key to the experimental card is whatever they throw in on there, if it's positive, they can start working in some of the more abstract senses behind that. So the more abstract thing of 132 is that there's just more emphasis on DPS and faster gameplay and like lower health, higher damage, less slow, tanky, plodding gameplay. And if people like that, then they can start working that more and more into Overwatch as a whole. And that's where the experimental card is really cool, because you can take that data, you can take that feedback, you can take that information, and you can plug it into the game as a whole, and therefore you can start making a better game. And that's kind of what I hope to see from it. That's really what I want out of it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this. I'm just skeptical about the value of the data they can get here. I think it'll be interesting to see. Like, sometimes they could throw in these curveballs and it'll really work. I'm interested. I'm more interested in something like this than I am in hero bans. Hero bans to me is the absence of options, and I don't like that. I'd rather they just did a balance part. Like, I'd rather they had like an aggressive 2 weeks balance cycle where things just get tweaked every 2 weeks and you know it's coming every 2 weeks, and they just go, yeah, we've nerfed Mei, we've nerfed Reaper, we've nerfed Doomfist, and we've buffed Sigma again slightly because he's completely dropped off the planet, and we buffed Zen because Zen's not getting played. And we've buffed Bastion because Bastion's never getting played, right? And then 2 weeks later, you know that there's going to be another patch cycle, and it's just going to continue going. So we'll see. Right. Back to your regularly scheduled toilet bowl.